Hi, hello. Hello and welcome to the very first Friday Reads of 2022. I'm really excited to go over the books that I have started, the books that I've enjoyed, the books I haven't enjoyed very much, and then also some current reads and some favorites from outside of books. It's going to be really lovely. I'm really excited. The first book I have to talk about today was wonderful. It is Gilded by Marissa Meyer. I really love her. Was like writing a Cinderella retelling but gender swapped. And I was like trying to like look up if it had been done before and stuff like that. And that's how I came across Cinder. I read it, but well, I didn't read it because my library didn't have it. It only had Scarlet. So it must have been 2013. And I read the entire Wikipedia thing and like memorized the plot and was like obsessed with it and stuff. And even though I hadn't read it, I talked endlessly to my best friend about it. And then about 6 months later or so, we were on a bus and she was like, hey, look what I'm reading. And I was like, is that Cinder? And she was like, yeah, I read Cinder. And then she bought Cinder, Scarlet, and Cress, and I read all three of them. And it was just so wonderful. And it was the first series after like Percy Jackson and stuff like that that I looked at releases, that I followed, and that I, did all of these things. And Heartless was one of the first books I ever read on my channel. And I've loved Renegades. I was very surprised by Instant Karma. I didn't expect to like it. It was contemporary, but I loved it. And then Gilded just was so wonderful. It is her first true fantasy. I would say that like her others were kind of sci-fi fantasy, and then Heartless is fantasy, but it's like very absurdist because it's based on Alice in Wonderland and a Queen of Hearts retelling. And then we have Renegades, which is pure sci-fi and superheroes, and then Instant Karma, which I guess has some like fabulism in it, but is pretty much contemporary. So I read all of those and I really love them. I think this is my 12th or 13th book by her, and I really love her work. I really love the way that she took Rumpelstiltskin and reimagined it. I think that it's a more mature YA. I really liked that the protagonist is both soft and mischievous at the same time, and I liked the villain a fair bit. I liked the twists and turns and the ways that it won, and I would like to reread it like now. It was very good. However, it didn't transfer into me liking the next book, which is Small Favors by Erin A. Craig. I had previously read House of Salt and Sorrow, which is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses, and had liked it a fair bit. I didn't like how the ending was happy when it was a horror book, but this ending, this was weird. I would not probably, I don't know, I might have picked it up still because I liked her writing, but American West, outlaw, western survival stories are not my fan. I do not like books when people are just starving to death. I do not like American Western books. It's just not my thing. And then it had like the religious like zeal in it, which can be done interestingly. It's not something that I super love. So yeah, this one is pretty much these people are infestering themselves into the town and stirring up crap and like doing all these things. And there was some moments of pure horror, but like I thought that the villains would be more involved. And I don't think this is a spoiler. Like, it's a Rumpelstiltskin telling. So you're introduced to this boy who won't tell you her name and then comes in, and we all know he's Rumpelstiltskin. We all know that he's a villain. And it's like, he's supposed to be this big reveal. And I was like, yeah, you tell me that Rumpelstiltskin is the guy messing things up. And yeah, I was not happy with that ending at all. I gave it, I think I gave it 2 stars. It was probably more than 2.5. Like, it wasn't a terrible book. It's just, it made me, it did all of the things I didn't like. However, from there we do go on a positive spin. We go from A Snake Falls from Heaven, and I liked this a lot. This was my first Darcy Littlebadger book. She is very famous for Alazzo, I believe is how it's said, and I was nervous to read this one because it was so hyped, so I was like, the second book looks great, let's start with here, and I'm glad I started with it. I really liked it. I can kind of understand, it's like kind of middle grade, kind of an adult, and it's like has fantasy, but it's also kind of contemporary. It feels very genre bending, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed the slow space. We have a Cottonmouth who has false skin and stuff like that and can appear human, and I really enjoyed just following him. He gets kicked out at the beginning and then he's like making homes. I thought he was in the human world, but he's not. He's in a different realm. And then we also have this girl who I think she starts out around 12. Her great-grandmother, who is 150 years old, just died, and she's like, telling all these stories, and she's like, is she actually 150 old? And she's kind of like looking at her indigenous language as well as Spanish and trying to figure out like what she's speaking and translating it. And I really liked the idea of like reclaiming your history, looking at it, and I felt that the interspersing between their stories were really good. I didn't enjoy the last like 1/3 / like half very much because it's where it collides, and I think that Littlebadger is much better at doing small scale slow books than action because she kind of skips over the action scenes. Like, it's kind of like, dramatic thing, and then 2 weeks later or like a few days later, and that works very well as like a small intimate coming of age slice of life story, but it doesn't work as well when she gets into the more action scenes. So yeah, I liked it a lot. It probably went down a half star. It probably would have been like a 4.5, and I kind of gave it a 4 star, but it was like a 3.5, 3.75 kind of in there range. So I definitely enjoyed it. I'm eager to read more books, to read Alatso now, but I would prefer, I would like if she wrote less climaxes and more just like, you know, people doing their stuff. But that is like a trope of me. I think like I like really boring books where like I find that climaxes often take away from books. So this could just be a complete my issue. I liked the writing, I liked the stories, I liked the characters a lot. And then my current read is one of the ones I've been anticipating for so long. I was so happy. I bought this one for me for Christmas because I got some money and I was like, you know what, I wanted to read this book for so long. I didn't know that it had almost like a fabulistic magical realism thing, not completely, but I don't know, I thought it was just like her everyday life, and I know that this has footnotes in it about studies about feminism and about sexism in Korea, and it's really, really well done. It also has the aspect of her kind of acting a little strange and a little weird and taking on other people's personalities and stuff, which I did not know about, but I'm really loving the writing. I will read the first like sentence or two because I think that it shows the writing style. I tend to like really beautiful ones, but I also like really simple if it's done concisely. Kim Ji-yeon is 33 years old, or 34 in Korean age. She got married 3 years ago and had a daughter last year. She rents a small apartment on the outskirts of Seoul, and her husband, John Daeun, 36. So it's like very simplistic, and I like it. It talks about like mental health, and it talks about sexism and stuff like that in very sparse but very informative ways. I really, really like it. After we kind of go through this first instance, but then we also are going back and looking at her mothers and looking at her grandmothers and kind of looking at the people who have formed her life and how it talks about like one of the most kind of devastating things I would have so far is when we're talking about her history and kind of the way that she's formed herself. I don't think it's a spoiler, it's like 20, 30 pages in. We're talking about her mother who has had 2 daughters and then she's about to have a 3rd one. Her going to her husband and saying, you know, what if it's a girl again? And he's like, well, we better pray not to. And then, you know, she goes and has an abortion because they can't afford to have another child that's a girl. And it's really sad to like see that and then have 5 years of infertility before she has another son. And this pressure that has had women, and it has footnotes in the bottom about the ways that like sexism has played into women's lives. It's played into all of these things. And there's also a really kind of emotional scene where it talks about her and her brothers and how she and her sisters worked in these factories, like tearing their bodies apart from sleep and all of these things to put their brothers through school. And they put their 2 older brothers through school, they became wealthy, and then they put their youngest brother through school on their middle grade level school, and at that point they realized that their time was never going to come. And then the other book I finished is Call Us What We Carry, which is by Amanda Gorman. It was my very first book of the year. I really enjoyed reading it. I liked the different ways that she said. I find it very hard to review poetry, and I don't have any on hand to read. One of my favorite things is she took a soldier in the First World War and he wrote about it, and she takes his journals where he chronicles the racism and just the everyday experience of being a Black soldier in France, and she takes it and makes it very sparse poems, which was probably my favorite part because I like very sparse poems. At times her poems went on a little bit too long and were just a little bit, I like very concise, very like snappy poems. And not to say that I don't like longer poems, I like every word to feel really intentional, and sometimes her poems just feel like they're going on, but then also there's always these beautiful lines. So I was very caught. At some points it was like, I'm not enjoying this, it's really dragging, and sometimes I was like, this is so good. I do think that even when the poems were like, okay, you didn't need to talk this long about this one thing in this one poem, I do think that she actually had really strong moments of writing, even when I found the material dragged a little bit, if that makes sense. So it is quite long for poetry. I always say that poetry collections, you know, it's very hard to read a lot of poetry at the same time, and this was, I think, at like 220 pages, which is a lot for a poetry. Normal collections are about 100 to 150 pages, I find. So it was quite long, but it was very good. I liked the way that she took a lot of things throughout. She looked at historical things, so she looked at several things from residential schools. She looked at the Spanish flu and the way that people treated them and the way that affected Indigenous people. She looked at World War I, as I said. She looked at migration reports, and she took all of these and weaved them into the history of what it means to be a Black person in the United States and what it means to be a person of color in the history of the United States, but also in present. And I really enjoyed the ways that she did that. And it is a book that I think would be like a really cool book to like study in school and stuff because it has so much depth there. The reason I didn't do a video last week on Friday Reads is I had not finished a single book by last Friday. I had watched a lot of movies, and that was really good. One of my favorite was watching the series Why Women Kill. I think this is fabulous. It looks at 3 women in 1963, in 1984, and in 2019, and it looks at them in the same house and the ways that they experience infidelity, the way that they experience things. And from the opening things, it's so brilliant. It has the men interviewing and like the ways that they talk. Like, I think the first man is like, Beth Ann always wanted to be a housewife. She was a virgin on our wedding day. And the second one is like, she always told me that this was her third husband. She liked partying and games and being entertained. And I'm like, oh, also her performance is just so brilliant. And then the third one is like, I met Taylor at a women's march. She told me immediately that she was bisexual. And I really loved the way that it shows women's, the involvement of women's, and it's not an interactive thing, but the way that they cut between scenes is so well. And I really enjoyed different aspects from each one. And yeah, I didn't love the ending. I have issues with climaxes, but I feel like a lot of great stories don't have good climaxes, and I've kind of like dealt with that a little bit. Like, I don't know, I don't need it to be perfect to be good, but I really, really enjoy the show. And if you like, it definitely has a lot of camp in it, which I love. Like, so many people were like, it's great designed and stuff like that, but like, it's hard to get through all the camp to see the characters. And I thought that I related very much to all of the women in this series. I related a lot to almost everyone in this series, and I thought that the funniness and the humor and stuff like that only endeared me more, and that it was very clear what they were doing with the humor to show the characters, and I thought the performances were outstanding. And let me know what you've been reading, what you've been watching, what you've been enjoying. Encanto has been the thing that has been pouring through all of my speakers all week. I've just been loving it so much. So yeah, musical theater is definitely the mood I'm in, which I love. Happy reading and writing, and I will see you next time.